I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 27 of the Overthrows podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber. Apologies for the delay, guys. I know a lot of you guys have been waiting. I can see Keshav Huria, Vignesh, Arko, Sid, and Aditya Mani Jha. You're all in the comments. Abdul TS as well. And there were some unforeseen events due to which there was a delay. But now we're here. How are you, Jared?
I'm good, man. Are you back in Pakistan, I see?
I am. I landed about more than 12 hours ago. Probably like 14 hours ago. And on my last day in Ireland, I fell off a bike. And now my knees are all messed up. So that happened as well.
What kind of bike?
Bicycle.
Oh, not even a motorbike. Not even anything cool.
No, just knees on gravel, straight up. And yeah, I had a pretty interesting journey, you could say. But anyway, you tell me, how's TalkSport?
Yeah, no, it was good. I just did something with Bumble. I got all my recordings mixed up today and yesterday. I've got Monday and Tuesday. I'm like recording all the time, and just made a mistake. But I'm here eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, we've never been on time. Half the time we're early as well. So there's no justification for when we record.
Absolutely. All right, let's dig into the fun stuff now. Starting with England versus the West Indies. England won the Edgbaston Test in 3 days by 10 wickets, sweeping the series 3-0. But the West Indies had England at 54 for 5 when they were trailing by 228 runs. And after that, England posted a lead of 94 runs. That was more or less the phase of play which decided this Test match.
Yeah, I think West Indies are basically a new ball bowling side. And if they can get all the way through you, obviously they'll run through you and take the game. But more often than not, that's not going to happen, And what will happen instead is the other team will crawl back in. Maybe, Gudakesh Modi can fix that in certain situations. But, I've been watching them for a long time, and they're very, very good at bowling when there's a little bit, even just a little bit in the pitch. Other than that, they're not very good. But they also can't bat. So they don't make enough runs to back up their bowlers. And perhaps if they, put on some really good totals all the way through, it would have gone much better.
Yeah, we'll come to the West Indies later on, but just on England, 3-0 was the expected outcome. I feel like they missed a trick by not rotating their fast bowlers. Like Pennington and Potts did not get a single game. And why not? You retired Jimmy Anderson to test your bench, and you ended up not testing your bench.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? I think there are a lot of people saying, should try and win the next game. And then when they try and win the next game, everyone's like, wait a minute, you said, we're going to try some people. So you can't really make it work. They've won the series. They've learned a little bit about Jamie Smith. They've learned a little bit about Shoaib Bashir, and they've learned a little bit more about Gus Atkinson. That's probably a win. That's 2 wins in the series. But yeah, it does feel like a missed opportunity to try. I suppose they know what Potts can do, so that's not as big a deal. But I would have liked to see Potts with a new ball. And was trying something slightly different from that perspective. But yeah, it's hard to say that they didn't do what they needed to do, because they did what they needed to do.
Yeah, I suppose so. Coming on, Gus Atkinson, of course, he was the player of the series. A historic debut at Lords, took 12 wickets, 4th best figures ever on Test match debut. Then he had a poor outing in Nottingham, right? Wasn't really good at Trent Bridge, but ended strongly at Edgbaston, took 6 wickets, including a four in the first innings. Would you say that he was the biggest positive for England in this series, or was it keeper batter Jamie Smith, who got everything that came his way, which I think is really important over here, and then also top scored in the final Test with 95, missed out on his debut ton by just 5 runs? Or maiden done, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I suppose They need batting more. They need stronger batting. Although without Anderson, you might argue that they need bowling now as well. But I think that they've found it easier to find bowling talent over the last couple of years. So it's probably Smith, but there's not much in it. I thought Atkinson bowled fine. The first test probably flattered him. The second test was probably not as many wickets as he should have got. So he's in kind of a weird middle ground situation there. But I need to see more of Smith and Atkinson to make a big claim further in. But if they can get another player who can actually genuinely bat and maybe even bat at 6 or 7, I think that'll be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming to their bowling, of course, Mark Wood was the tormentor-in-chief at Edgbaston. He took 7 wickets in total, including 5 for 40 in the third innings, and he was hitting high speeds, which is expected of him, and he got the ball to reverse. Now, England, at least since the start of this series, have been obsessing over the Ashes in 18 months' time. And if you think of the Ashes in 18 months' time, you'd probably want a guy like Mark Wood to be featuring in at least 3 of those 5 test matches.
Yeah. I think we all got very excited about how fast he bowled. Was it in the first or the second test?
It was the second test. He
test,
did break Kevin Sinclair's bone, to be fair to him.
Yeah. But he didn't actually get that many wickets. And the issue for Mark Wood at home, anyway, has been that he can bowl, but he doesn't quite get the wickets that he deserves or looks like he should get at times. And generally over a period of time, you win those back. Mohammad Shami's a perfect example of someone like that. Yeah. But it's probably a bit of a concern that he didn't get those wickets. Now he's in a position where he has taken a whole bunch of wickets. Will feel a little bit more confident. I think they need him to take wickets at home, right? Like as in, you don't want him to just be an away conditions bowler, and there's nothing really that suggests he shouldn't bowl in England. So if he can work out a way to play 2 or 3 tests every summer at home and be helpful, that's a huge plus for them. I'm not too worried about the Ashes because it's all series, right? If Mark Wood works, he can change this bowling lineup.
He's definitely that kind of character. And I mean, even when we saw him in the Ashes in England last time, he did come and create an impact, right? Definitely, started getting Khwaja out early, which was a big issue for England in the first few test matches. You mentioned, someone who can bowl at home and you're not too worried about away form. Well, they have one bowler in their ranks who is a bit of a home track bully, right? Chris Woakes is someone who's done extremely well in England and hasn't so much away from home. And he's done well 2 tests in a row after looking really, really out of rhythm at Lord's. In this particular test, he scored a valuable 62 runs with the bat and took 4 wickets with the ball. But do you see him as someone who could feature for England in away test matches? Because right now I feel like they've given him a role in which he will be a home test match specialist, at least in this next little period.
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, it's, Wood's problem is kind of rare that you're good away and you're bad at home. And Woakes is the more common one. Unless you just go really extreme and go, we'll just play Woakes for the next 3 years in England, or 4 years in England, as long as we can get him to bowl, and then we'll play Wood away from home. It doesn't really work. And realistically, there are going to be times away from home they need Woakes to bowl for them. And there are going to be times at home they're going to need Wood to bowl for them. So they want these things to develop. Woakes obviously hadn't had a lot of cricket, so that rhythm that you were talking about makes sense, right? Like he just hadn't bowled all that much. They'll be happy that he bowled and that, he felt comfortable and he looked better by the end of the series. But ultimately, we have learned nothing about Chris Woakes that we did not know before.
Yeah, and we always knew that he adds incredible depth to England's batting in Test cricket or any sort of cricket that he plays, really. And that did come to the fore. But coming to other all-rounders performing with the bat, Ben Stokes, who had been experiencing a really, really poor run of form, up until the end of the first Test match at Lord's. He scored a 50 in Trent Bridge, and now in Edgbaston, he scored twin 50s, including what was a 24-ball half century in the 4th innings. Very, very Ben Stokes of him to do that. Like, just coming out to open the batting on its own was incredible.
Yeah, it's funny. When he first started Bazball, he was like nuts. I don't know if you remember those first few innings, but I remember he was trying to be McCullum, I think, as much as anything. And he kind of settled back down to being maybe one of their more consistent kind of, well, not consistent because he hasn't made a lot of runs, but, as in he was trying to bat him in a more traditional kind of way. But he still has that other gear. And yeah, I mean, I think Ben Stokes being mad is always like better than Ben Stokes not being mad.
Yeah. One last performer from England before we move on to the West Indies. Joe Root got runs once again, 87 of them in this test match, and he has now breached the 12,000 run barrier in test cricket, overtaking Brian Lara to become the 7th highest run scorer of all time. He is also averaging 50 plus in test cricket again, which, fulfills my personal obsession of checking his average every now and then. And I asked Mark this question last week when he was on as your replacement, and I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you see him overtaking Sachin's run tally in test cricket, given the fact that he is now less than 4,000 runs away from Sachin, and England play a shit ton of test cricket every year, and he is 33 years of age, which is not too old for a batter?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just did this topic with Bumble as well, actually, on Talksport. And, Bumble's like, look, they play a whole bunch of test matches. He's only 33, as you said. He's young, he's fit. He finds run scoring quite easy. He should be fine. But there's so many elements. And I saw the podcast you did with Mark, and my first thought was, it's probably a video that we will probably have to do at one stage, because there's a few things to look in. First, what happens after 35? Does his batting average start to dip? We know that there can be whole English summers where the ball just swings around corners. Will we go back to that sort of thing? Will England maybe be in a position the next 2 or 3 years, as they reset after baseball or change up after baseball? Would they be in a situation where they want to make it so that their bowlers dominated home, which, kind of ruined Kohli's batting average for a while? Does he want to keep playing, right? Like, they play enough test matches that he can beat this record, right?
Yeah.
But one year he's going to come out of a test match or out of a Christmas and look at the new year and see that they've got, 14 or 16 test matches listed and think to himself, that's a lot of test matches. Sachin's whole, I think Rahul Dravid told me this for this book, but I think Rahul Dravid said this before and others have said it as well, which is Sachin's whole life kind of revolved around batting, right? Roots doesn't as much. I think he absolutely loves batting, but I still think I'm not sure he loves batting that much more than he loves playing golf, right?
Right.
And that might sound like a flippant thing to say, but it means that there is something else out there he does like to do. I know that, he's got a lot of business interests as well, a few other things that interest him. He owns a Barmy Army, right? Like, essentially, Joe Root owns a Barmy Army. So, and that's not the only property he owns. He's got, a few other things. So I do think, with all that said, there's so many things that could stop him breaking the record. But if you ask purely from the fact that how many test matches they play and how he bats, it's hard to see how the only reason he wouldn't break it is because he doesn't want to, right? Yeah. And that seems to be the position he's in at the moment.
Yeah, and plus, he's at 143 test matches right now. If he continues for, let's say, 5 more years, surely he'll play more than 200, right? Given
900.
that England play, so many test matches. And he has had a good record when it comes to not getting injured. Sachin played 200. And if he crosses that test match number mark, then I see him, overtaking Sachin's record. But to your point, we don't know when he feels like it's time to call it a day. He doesn't seem like the sort of person who obsesses on these numbers. So
we're also just thinking that he's just going to want to keep going, right?
Yeah.
You don't know that is necessarily the case. So look, it's a weird one. I'll just have a look at this is how many tests Roots played. So 2020, he played 8. So obviously that was a bit COVID-y. Then he played 15, 15, 8. He's played 8 so far this year. So he's got another 3 at home. And then they've got New Zealand. So what's he looking at? Another 13-ish, 14-ish this year?
They're also coming to Pakistan for 3 test matches. So
is that this year or the start of next year?
It's this year, October.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So that's another big year. If he keeps playing 15, tests a year and doesn't get injured, then the numbers are on his side. How interested he is, whether he has a drop off, right? Like, and I've been looking at this a lot. You look at someone like Gordon Greenidge, probably at one stage was, on pace to be maybe the greatest opening batter of all time. And then the last 4 or 5 years of his career, I think that's right, he just completely drops off the cliff. And he's still clearly in the best West Indian players, right? And that's going to be Root's plus. Root will continue to play because as long as he can average over 38, he's going to get a spot probably, unless their batting completely changes over the next couple of years. But the other side of that is that drags his average down, which means he doesn't make as many runs per test, and maybe doesn't enjoy it as much or whatever or anything else.
It's interesting you chose the number 38 because that's how much he averaged in 37 first class games prior to debuting in Test cricket. And he's averaging 50 plus in Tests. So clearly the trajectory has gone up. Coming to the West Indies now, of course. Look, the batters had their moments in this series. Even in this Test match, you had 4 half centurions from the West Indies. Brathwaite, Holder, Mikhail Louis and Kavem Hodge. And Joshua De Silva is another cricketer who's done quite well with the bat in this series.
He's not got out.
Yeah, but whilst they have competed somewhat, apart from Hodge's stun at Trent Bridge, none of them have really, dug deep and played a long innings. And perhaps that was, what let them down with the bat, because the bowling was not up to par. But with the bat, you felt at times like they were really in control.
Yes, what? So you're saying the bowling wasn't up to par?
I feel that way because I feel like with the bat, they've done more than what was expected of them. Take Lords out of the equation. Forget Lords for a second, right? And just look at the other 2 Test matches. There were many phases where they were more than competing with the bat. But with the ball, barring that one burst where they got England 54 for 5, there wasn't much to write home about.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. Kemar Roach maybe would have changed that a little bit if he'd been available and bowling instead of Jaden Seals. Although, Seals obviously had some good moments as well.
Seals was the player of the series for the West Indies, took wickets on regular intervals and had that county cricket experience as well.
But whether, I mean, maybe you might be right. Maybe Roach plays ahead of Alzari Joseph, although he's vice captain, isn't he?
And he took 4 wickets in this test, but then again, he was going for so many runs, and that was a constant theme with Alzari this series.
Well, that's another thing. Either way, Roach would have made them slightly better, and obviously he's probably their best bowler in English conditions. They're just not very good at batting, man. I mean, what they can't put enough pressure back on people. So there was the Kavem Hodge and Alec Athenay's partnership. That was the second test, am I thinking right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so the second test, they're putting runs on, and I'm like, okay, but eventually this is going to end because neither of these players is going to make a double 100, right? True. Neither of these players is going to make 170, and they're not going to put enough on. And then once they do, they've got Holder and De Silva to block, right? There isn't really a lot there. And you look at Kavem Hodge, he's made 6 first-class hundreds in 66 games, but at an average of 30. He's never scored over 158 in a first-class game, right? So you're suddenly in a situation where, and he's their best batter of this series, you've just said. Did he make the most runs for them?
I'm quite sure he did because he scored 120 and then another 55 in this test match. So
right?
I would assume so.
Alec Athenay.
I mean, Kirk McKenzie scored, 33 runs in 3 test matches?
Yeah. But,
something like that.
Best I'm not talking about him.
His average was 5.5 in the series.
Alec Athenay's 42 first-class games, an average of 34, right? They did about as well as they could have with the bat. Had Jimmy Anderson or Stuart Broad still been around, they probably wouldn't have even done as well as they ended up doing. But they needed their bowling to exceed expectations. I would say that they outbatted what we thought they would, but it's limited, right? Kavem Hodge is a wonderful cricketer and a great story of someone who has worked and, wasn't ever thought to be a test player, kept upping his game through professionalism, through self-help books and everything else that he does to get himself into position to do that. But he's still a guy who averages 30 in first-class cricket, right? We can tell that he has more talent than that. And you watch him play and you're like, how has this guy ended up with this record?
He pulls the ball really well. I was really impressed by his
That's because he's fucking 3 inches tall, mate. He doesn't have a choice. It's the only shot he can play. But, you look at those guys and McKenzie and, and they've had to pick someone like Mikel Lewis out of nowhere, right? I think the batting did fine on this series considering the overall talent. Having said that, that's where the bowling didn't quite step up and the batting was never enough to really they batted well enough to keep themselves in games at times. They never batted well enough to put real pressure on England.
Yeah, they weren't able to impose themselves in that way. And the one time where they could have been in that position was when Shamar Joseph got out and Joshua was doing really well at the other end at Trent Bridge. Even in this test match, right, had they bowled England out for sub 100 score, who knows what the result might have been, but they missed out on that opportunity. I personally feel like coming into the series, I thought that their bowlers will keep them in games and their batting will let them down. It was somewhat of a flip,
That's probably true,
with respect to that. Yeah, but just one final thing. I know that you're mates with Kevin Hodge. He's had a pretty memorable series, even if the West Indies have lost 3-0, scoring a ton and then runs in the third test as well. And of course, for people who don't know, there is a picture somewhere of Jared's son Ezekiel putting his finger in Kevin Hodge's ear. We still yet to find this.
We can't find it, but we know we were there. We remember taking it.
Yeah, it exists. Have you had a word with your mate? Any texts that you've exchanged with him?
No, I don't do that a lot during series. Unless there's something that I think can help them. And also, when he made his 100, everyone who's ever met it. I remember when Ed Cowan made his 100. Or maybe it was his debut 50. Either way, I remember Eddie telling me that he got a message from the guy who used to take him home from nightclubs when he was 19. Like that, he had a taxi driver that would pick him up and take him out to his suburbs quite regularly. And Eddie Cowan got a message from that guy. And I remember hearing that story and just thinking, I don't like being the person who messages someone just after they're doing something. Also, I don't want to, not in a bad way, but as an analyst, I don't want to say a thing that doesn't help. But sometimes there's just, especially with coaches, I'll send messages. No, I haven't. He agreed to come on the podcast, and then I forgot to get back to him. Whoops. So we'll get him on. We'll get him on a Red Inker at one stage to explain his journey, and to have a chat. But I'll tell you one story, which I'm sure will come up on the Red Inker. I remember how excited he was to be picked for the squad in Bangladesh, and how much work he had put in. And he's not the most natural cricketer in the world, right? Like his bowling has helped him a lot. And, now he's at test level because he's a batter, because he kept working at his batting. He's a really good athlete in the field and a brilliant fielder and, a great teammate and everything else. But he is someone who's worked really hard. So for me, whether I know the player or not, those are the sorts of players that are the ones that you gravitate towards, right? The ones who didn't have it gifted to them. I think I told the story when he got picked for Bangladesh. I think I told the story then of how great it was that someone like him had got a chance. And I don't think he played in that series. That might have been the Carl Mayers series. And then, to see him doing this in England, like the thing about making 100 in England, India, or Australia is it actually helps the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Right. It counts as more of 100. He might end up coaching a school in England, right, one day, or, working for a county or whatever. And you don't get that as much if you make 100 in New Zealand, or if you make 100, versus Pakistan or Sri Lanka and everything else. I think he's probably a future coach, someone like Kevin Hodge, if he wants to, maybe even a general manager if he wanted to go that far. So for me, to see him bat the way he did, it was just really enjoyable. And people, it's funny, you still get the comments, and you get them more than anyone. Of he's Pakistani, or he's Australian or whatever. It's like I've got friends who play in the Australian team, and I know some of the people who coach it and manage it, and all these sorts of things. I remember when India won the World Cup, I was just happy for Rahul Dravid because he was a friend of mine, and I know what stress he was under. Right?
Yeah.
I was happy for Kevin Hodge because, again, the situation that Kevin Hodge has put himself in. Happy for Australia when George Bailey when Australia won the World Cup in India. All these things. After a while, the nationality of people. There are some people who hold on to it, but for the vast majority of us, we just make friends within the game, and you just want to see your friends do well, as you do in any part of society. And Kevin Hodge doing well, making 100, being on TV. It's seeing him excited to make that run is the Kevin Hodge that I knew back when he was 23, 24, when I knew him a lot better. And it was just great to see.
Yeah, when Kevin Hodge eventually becomes West Indies coach and wins the T20 World Cup with them, we're going to replay this clip as part of some reel or whatever. But anyway, that wraps up West Indies versus England. We'll be taking a short break. You guys are watching Overthrows with Jared and Behram, and we'll be back with Zimbabwe versus Ireland after this ad.
Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com nord.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via nordvpn.com/Kimber.
Welcome back to Overthrows. You guys are with Jared and Behram. And Ireland and Zimbabwe were playing a one-off test match in Belfast. Belfast, of course, became the 23rd country to host test cricket. And Ireland required 158 to win this in the 4th innings and were reduced to 33 for 5 at the end of day 3. And despite that, and dropping 5 catches across 2 innings, they won the test match by 4 wickets. And did you catch any of the action at all for this one, Jared?
I did. I probably followed this more than the other one just because this was a captivating test match from the start. It was, Joyla Gumbi was like a run a ball 30 odd or something and almost made it 50. And I was like, what is happening there? Like, what's going on in Northern Ireland? We should play every test there. And it was just the ebbs and flows of that match all the way through were fascinating. And, Zimbabwe are like a shit version of West Indies, really, in that the batting, you're not sure what you're going to get. But you know that with the new ball specifically, they can cause all sorts of chaos. And it was a very similar kind of thing. And I didn't get a chance because I stuffed up. So this morning, before we were going to come on, I was going to go back and watch it on MV Play, all the buys. I don't know if you watch buys on MV Play, but I would have wanted to watch all the buys. Because obviously their keeper broke the record for the highest percentage of buys ever. And I just wanted to see what that looked like on a ball, but I didn't get a chance. But I just thought it was a really great, fascinating game of cricket. And, I would love to know what Cricinfo and what the TV ratings and what the social media was for it, because it felt like to me, cricket fans were captivated by the weirdness of that game and how close it was.
Yeah, as you said, ebbed and flowed beautifully, and there were twists, there were turns. One team was up one moment, the other team the next. And you mentioned Zimbabwe's pace bowlers, right? That remains Zimbabwe's strength, by the way, their pace bowling attack. Chivanga, who you've spoken about in the past, I remember, and Blessing, they took 3 fours in the first innings. And in the second innings, the 4th in the game, Richard Ngarava, the left-arm pacer, took 4 quick wickets and literally had Ireland on the ropes. They were, 21 for 5 and then ended the day at 33 for 5. And at that point, I was convinced that there is no way Zimbabwe lose this test match. But they did. And that just made it all the more special that, at the end of every day, we had no clue what's going to happen. Yeah. But the one day where we felt like, okay, now we're quite certain what's going to happen, the opposite did.
I must admit, I did put a bet on Ireland when they were. I'm trying to think of what the score was. But once the second day started, partly because again, like I was saying with the West Indies, I see Zimbabwe as such a new ball dependent team, and I just thought that Ireland had guys like Adair and McBride down the order who could get, and it wasn't a big total. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe if they were 100 for 5 and chasing 320, I wouldn't have. But it was a small total, and I felt one partnership could change it. But no, you're right. All the way through, it just every time I felt like something was going to happen. I remember early on when Gumbi was batting. What was that on? I must have been on day 1 actually.
Yeah.
And the pitch looked really flat, and then suddenly Mark Adair just started swinging the ball sideways. For a couple of deliveries. It was like at no stage could you work out what was going to happen in 10 seconds time in that game. And it was absolutely fascinating. But ultimately, Ireland is the more all-round side, and that's what got them through. But, this is the thing with Zimbabwe. Every now and again, they don't qualify for a World Cup, and Zimbabwe fans get really upset when I say they've actually got an okay side, because they do.
Yeah.
They won games in Australia. They played well in that last World Cup. They, they beat the India B side in a game recently, and this is across formats. They show little flashes. We're like, oh, good little team here. And then they show flashes where you're just like, am I batting for them?
Yeah, well, the batting was their weakness, of course. Even though I felt like the seamers, as good as they were, they could have been more clinical, at least with, finishing up the job. And of course, Ireland had dropped so many that Zimbabwe didn't make use of that, right? But come to their batting. Prince Masware. I hope I've pronounced
Is
that
this
correctly.
the best opening partnership by name we've ever had in cricket?
Gumbi and Prince.
Joy Lord Gumbi and the Prince.
Yeah, I mean, it's close to King Charles for the West Indies in T20s, right? That's a good one too. But he scored 74 and looked his record up, and he was this under-19 captain, I believe, who then didn't play for a long time, and he comes and scores 74. Then another good thing was that the other half centurion was youngster Dion Myers, who's been doing well. He scored 57. So you look at the rest of the batting card, and there's some senior names who didn't do much, right? Craig Irvine failed. Sean Williams got starts, couldn't convert. And they did, or at least I felt that they had a big hole in the form of no Sikandar Raza Butt, who I would just play anyway, So I feel like even though, the fast bowling did all right, the batting had done more than we expect of Zimbabwe, barring the seniors failing. That wasn't nice.
They were like 100 for 2, weren't they, in the first innings?
87 for no loss after the first session. That's when Gumbi was playing really well.
And then in the second innings, they none for 45, none for 40-ish. I'll be honest, I didn't have Zimbabwe down for either of those starts.
Exactly.
They collapsed after that, probably both times, if we're being honest. But they certainly put themselves in a position through that. Look, their best batter is playing county cricket he's playing in the 100 at the moment, right? Well, I should say their best young batting talent out there is, maybe on the pathway to play for England at the moment. What's his name? Munawai?
Muwai?
Yeah.
I can't pronounce it. I know how to spell it.
Weirdly enough, I saw him in the Grey Nichols have that new bat design out at the moment. I saw him in the ad for that. So I was thinking about him. But I'm pretty sure I saw him in a 100 game as well. I've been saying for a while that sort of that older core, that Irvine Williams core is and old heads are like, oh, I don't know why you haven't go at the batting. Look at these guys. I'm like, yeah, these guys are like right at the end of their career, and then and they were struggling, international players at the good, solid, lower end players, and they're no longer in their primes. Again, I suppose you would say that this is a batting unit that on paper looked absolutely like it had nothing to give. And they found a way to get themselves into a position to win this game. But unfortunately, not having that sort of test quality spinner, which for Zimbabwe is not, not all, they've had good spinners over the years, to call on in these sorts of situations. And that was a wicket where you probably needed a spinner. It was spinning more than we probably thought Belfast was going to spin. So had they had a spinner, I think they might have actually ended up winning that game after getting those 5 early wickets. Or not if they had a spinner, if they had a top quality spinner available to them. Unfortunately for them, the 2 best spinners are probably Sikandar and Ryan Burl, and they're both very good bowlers, but they're probably most limited overs bowlers. So as you said before, they didn't go with that option. I'm not sure that would have helped them, but I think they should be happy. They went to Ireland. And they pushed Ireland all the way and lost by 4 wickets. Who had Zimbabwe losing by 4 wickets to Ireland? Like, it wasn't. I think the odds were. I'm trying to think. I think Zimbabwe were about 3 or 4s coming into that game, so no one had them as even a remote chance. And yet, as you said, at stumps, they were a legitimate chance to win that game.
I mean, if Ngarava took another wicket at that point, who knows? They probably would have won it. But you made a fantastic point when you said that Zimbabwe were lacking a frontline or top quality spinner. And if you look at the player of the match in this game, Andy McBride, he's an off-spin bowling all-rounder, took 7 wickets across 2 innings, and then scored 83 runs as well, including an unbeaten match-winning 55 in the 4th innings. So he was the difference between both teams if you look at it towards the end.
Yeah, and that's an advantage that Ireland have, right? Like, McBride isn't a great spinner. We saw him bowl in Asia. He's not going to win you a lot of games, but in conditions like this, because he can bat a little bit, it allows you to play him and know that, you can shore up the batting lineup even if he's not a top order player. And he's not ever going to be a bad spinner, right? I'm trying to think of it. He's kind of like a combination of like Jack Leach and Nathan Lyon, but just not as talented as either of them. As in, Andy McBride's worst ball doesn't get bowled very often, and it's not that bad, right? Yeah. And he's always there and thereabouts. it gives you a chance. He's a very good competitor.
He bats better than Leach and Lyon combined.
Yeah, exactly. And then he gives you a bit of batting as well. And he's a son of a bitch cricketer, let's be honest. Like, you have to go through Andy McBride in those sorts of situations. And that's why the Irish team love him. Also, I think I'm right in saying that, well, I don't know if that's his home pitch, but he's from Northern Ireland, I think, Andy McBride.
Oh, is he?
So I would have assumed that, he would have more, not that the other players don't, but he would have more experience there. So as a spinner, he's probably spent a little bit of time bowling in those kinds of conditions. I could be wrong. I thought he was from Northern Ireland. I might actually be wrong. No, yeah, it is. Yeah, he is from Northern Ireland.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
well, that makes sense. But it is
So
incredible.
again, but the wicket did spin as well, which helped him.
Yeah. I love the fact that spin bowling ultimately decided this test match, right? And he was the leading wicket taker with 7.
Again,
not
who had
being
that
a
on their
seamer.
bingo card, right?
Exactly. And then, of course, there were other batting performances from Ireland. Lachlan Tucker scored a very valuable 56 in the 4th innings, partnering McBride towards the end. And those were the two guys who provided Ireland with that all-important partnership, which took them home. And then another batter who performed was Peter Moore, scored 79 in the 1st innings. And funnily enough, Moore used to play for Zimbabwe not too long ago.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I've never quite got to the bottom of how all that happened and everything else. But yeah, he's a, someone who hasn't made a lot of runs in Test cricket so far. He's got a sort of a decent record in first class record. He's like on the low end of an international player, but he kind of looks like he can play international cricket and get you some runs occasionally in that sort of, like, not quite as a good version of Max O'Dowd type of player.
I mean, Ireland will be super happy that they've nabbed him from Zimbabwe, and then he comes and performs versus Zimbabwe.
Yeah, not ideal for Zimbabwe, is it? It's the one thing that we don't factor in as much is they do lose a lot of talent still. If you look, if you look at more, if you look at that young guy in county cricket that we talked about before, if you look at balance, they're still losing a lot of very good players, to school systems, and to everything else. So they still have that issue within Zimbabwe cricket that the best players aren't always playing in Zimbabwe and available for them. This one probably hurts more because pardon the pun, because it's the kind of player who they wouldn't expect to lose.
Absolutely, and he's
and
the one
not losing to a major nation either.
Yeah, I mean, another opener scores 19 instead of 69 or 79, and there you have it. But I mean, if you look at the flip side, Ireland are always losing their place to England, so it's good that they've gotten someone from someone else and won a test match. But it was an enthralling test match, and I just hope there are more of these, and both Zimbabwe and Ireland get like more opportunities to play the longest format, because that's the only way they're going to get better. And so same goes for all the other, big nations which are not big 3 nations. They just need more cricket, and then I feel like the sport will definitely be more competitive. Anyway, coming to India versus Sri Lanka, the T20I series has begun. 2 wins out of 2 for Surya Kumar Yadav, the captain. He also scored 58 of 26 in the first T20I. And that was pretty much as good a start as he could have hoped for, and Gautam Gambhir as well in his tenure as head coach of India. Particularly given the belligerent brand of cricket India have played, their batters have just come out and hit the ball, from the word go.
Yeah, I haven't watched any of it.
Yeah, but that's basically what they did. They've come out and they've gone bang, 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 which is quite impressive, because we spoke of India being this team that gets defensive in tournaments. They overcame that demon in the recently concluded T20 World Cup. And now they've started this new era, ushering in, this new, or not new, but it seems to be a mindset which just says that we are going to go out there and completely butcher the opposition, which is pretty cool.
Look, this is so early. We don't really know what's happening at the moment, and we're still not seeing, full strength side or anything, and they're going up against a struggling Sri Lanka. But yeah, they're trying some things out. They're trying out a new captain. Obviously, they've got a new coach. They're playing around with a little bit. I think they went in with Hardik as... he was scheduled to bowl 5 overs in the last game. I don't even know how many overs they ended up playing in that game. But, all these sorts of things, they're trying things and trialing things and moving things forward. I think that's all very, very fair and a good way of doing things.
Yeah, the only thing I don't agree with in their trial is not selecting Abhishek Sharma for this series in the T20, as that's something that personally, I have a grudge against now. And with the ball, there was this fluky threefer by Rayan Parag, which we're not going to talk about. You will have some words to say about what I'm going to tell you next. Ravi Bishnoi has had a very interesting series. Took 3 for 26 in the second game, and we both have discussed how that's not a very frequent occurrence, him taking more than 2 wickets. But he's also caught nothing. I think he alone has dropped 3 catches. And it's been bizarre that I feel like at this point, you have to say it's a net negative series because of all that poor fielding.
Yeah, very interesting. On the Rayan Parag thing, we might have already seen his greatest bowling in international cricket at a very young age. Yeah, look, Bishnoi, I thought was it the second game, I was watching Sri Lanka bat, and I thought Sri Lanka had a really big chance of putting on a big total and, putting pressure on India there. And Bishnoi was part of that collapse where they lost, 4 wickets in 7 balls or something, or whatever it was. Yeah. So that's very, very good. But this is one of those things when it comes to him or Chahal or anyone else, there does seem to be a lot of finger spinners, spinners in general in India that are really, really skillful but can't field, right? And that's not that uncommon. I mean, we see it with other countries as well. And so
Tikshana cannot field for shit.
Mujib might be the top of that list in the world.
Mujib as well. In fact, Tikshana also dropped one in one of these games. But yeah, both of those guys, I would never trust them if a catch is coming their way.
So you have to weigh that in. And I don't think fans weigh those things in as much as cricket people do, because cricket people know that every wicket counts and, et cetera, and want to be in that situation. So it's interesting that has happened when they are moving forward with him at this stage, because I always thought that was Chahal's biggest, not his biggest drawback, but what does he give you other than his bowling? True. Right? And when you're going up against Akshar Patel and Jadeja and Ashwin, right? All these other, even Kuldeep can squiggle some runs away when he has to.
Yeah.
When you're going up against those guys and you bring nothing else to the table, it means that the selection committee, you have to be that much better than all the other bowlers. And I don't know if I see Bishnoi at that sort of Chahal level of fielding. But this is not it's not a good start to the new era for him to be dropping all these catches.
Yeah, and he has done well in the IPL as a fielder. I've seen some good catches, but this is when clearly the management has decided to give him a bit of an extended run as India's, wrist spin option. Of course, Kuldeep is sitting these games out. But in order to cement that spot, he can't be dropping 3 catches in 2 games just on his own. He's an interesting one. Anyway, let's come to Sri Lanka for a bit, of course. The batting has been interesting. There was a point in the first T20I where it felt like they could chase it down. Pathum Nissanka scored 79 of 48 and Kusal Mendes scored a 27 ball 45. But then I believe both of those guys fell in quick succession, and thereon it was all India. In the second game, Kusal Mendes once again scored a 34 ball 53, and I love his evolution as a T20 batter. But then again, once he got out, the batting crumbled and they ended up with 161 on the board. So barring Nissanka and Mendes, who have been doing quite well in the recent past, the batting just continues to fail. And that's a major concern for Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I've been writing about this for 3 years or so now, since the T20 World Cup in UAE, perhaps. They haven't worked it out. They're trying to get their most talented batters to score quicker, which is one way of going about it. I'm not saying it's the wrong way. They just haven't managed to find a generation of guys who can hit the ball for 4 and 6 and stay in. And it means that they're just falling behind so much. If they had even a bog ordinary batting lineup with their bowling, they'd be a really interesting side, but they don't. And they can't put any pressure back. And it seems to me the amount of times that they do put on one good partnership or one period where you're like, oh, they're going to make... No. Oh, this is no. And it just feels like that happens too consistently with them. The problem is that they've never really hit a World Cup with their bowling lineup all fit and firing and ready to go anyway. So they would almost need their bowling to be like peak Pakistan 1999 bowling to be able to overcome their batting problems at this point. I just think batting has moved on so much, and Sri Lanka is so far behind.
Yeah, the only way I see them not getting swept in this series is if Pathirana, who to be fair did take 4 for 40 in the first game, if he does something special in that final game, then perhaps they can avoid a whitewash over here. But other than that, like, I feel like even, the gulf between this Indian side, which is a team, with a new coach, new management, is going through its own transformation. They are like at least a light year and a half ahead in terms of like batting strength and overall capability as a T20 unit.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's just a lot to be done, right? Like, what is the future there? Where are they going? Chris Silverwood, left. They lost the captain. It just seems like same old madness as usual.
Also, I've been corrected. Yes, it was Kusal Pereira in the second game with a 50. But Kusal Mendes' evolution has been really interesting. So don't challenge me. Yeah.
To be honest,
it's an easy one to mix up. But if you look at that guy's
I reckon I mixed
range,
them up for the first 7 years of their career, if we're being honest.
Yeah. Who is this in the comments who has pointed that out? Man, if you look at how Kusal Mendes has stepped up his game in limited overs, you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, there's a trend over there. And, I mean, sure, add Kusal Janith Pereira to this as well. There's still a sheer dearth of batting talent in Sri Lanka, so that point holds. Anyway, let's take another short break. You guys are watching Overthrows with Jared and Behram, and we'll be back with the Women's Asia Cup after this ad.
This is brought to you by Cricket 8. They are a new player in the game trying to educate fans on what is really happening in cricket. We have a partnership with them where we host live watch-alongs, do podcasts, and write articles. If you want to know what is really happening with our game, visit cricket8.com. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.
Welcome back to Overthrows. You guys are with Jared and Behram. And Sri Lanka have won their first ever Women's Asia Cup in Dambulla over the weekend. It was a great final. India got to 165 courtesy of Smriti Mandana scoring 60. Jemima and Richa Ghosh went, crazy. Lots of fireworks over there. And then there were tons of missed opportunities by the home side as well. It did not matter in the end as the Lionesses chased the target down in 18.4 overs fairly comfortably. And that is the highest successful chase in a Women's T20I final, Jared.
Yeah, and also, they didn't have as much of an easy game against Pakistan in the semi-final, right?
Yeah.
So the semi-final one, Chamari kind of carried them, got them into a position where they couldn't lose, and then suddenly they lost a bunch of wickets and got themselves behind the reat again, and then ended up sort of fighting back and winning that, a couple of balls to go, I think, in the end?
Yeah, I think they won in 19.5.
Yeah. But that was a scrappy game where Pakistan were on top and Sri Lanka were on top, and it went to and fro all the way through. And then they got to the final, and Chamari put them in a position again where they looked like they were on top. And I was like, okay, well, she's out. Now what happens? Nothing happened. They just won easily. I mean, it was remarkable. And she was obviously a major part in both of those victories. And, she's very good at cricket. I don't think that's particularly a new revelation. But I think
she was the player of the tournament, right? Chamari Atapattu scored 304 runs at an average north of 101 and striking it over 146. And, of course, as you mentioned, 63 versus Pakistan in the semi, 61 versus India in the final. Early in the tournament, she scored her career best score, 119. And I feel like she is the biggest Sri Lankan cricket icon in contemporary cricket, men's team included.
Yeah, I mean, she's just, over the last 2 years, just gone from a very good player, that sort of Hayley Matthews level player, to something else, I think. And, and Hayley Matthews has also found another level. So they're both gone up, those two players. But she's just absolutely blitzing now. And she looks like one of the better players in the world. The fact that she didn't go in the last WPL auction looks increasingly more ridiculous as the days pass. But yeah, I think the best sign for them is that, yes, she carried them a long way through, and we know that is a big part of it. But the truth is that they got over the line against Pakistan without her. And they got over the line against India without her in a final against India with that big chase. I think all those things just point to how brilliant she's been.
Yeah,
How brilliant they have been around her, I should say. That's what I meant to say.
absolutely. Like they've batted brilliantly around her. If you look at their, recent success, yes, she's been a big part of it, but she's not the only one. The youngster who opens the batting, Vishmi Gunaratne, she was really good in the first half of the tournament. Then Harshita Samra Vikrama, her unbeaten 69 in the final, after having dropped a crucial catch in the first innings, right? That could have been the headline, yet she overcame that. So I have to salute her nerves and her mental strength. And she was player of the match. It's not just her. There were other players who contributed regularly. Kavita Dilhari, I forget the name. There are a few cricketers over there who can really, mature or develop into special cricketers. And Chamari is the perfect role model. But how they've stepped up as a T20 unit is incredible, because this is not just the only success that they've seen in recent times. They won in South Africa. They won in England. They won somewhere else as well, man. I can't remember at this point, but they have been very, very, successful as a T20 unit in the last 2 years. And this is a team that didn't play quick cricket for 15 days in the COVID
515 years, that would be a story.
That would really have been a story.
Look, they were, we won't even get into what the Sri Lankan Cricket Board managed to do to them and almost ruined everything from that point of view. But no, you're right. I think it is a brilliant story. And Chamari is obviously player of the tournament and is a huge part of it. But it does feel like they're building something else around this, and that things are starting to come together. And it's just so brilliant for women's cricket to have Sri Lanka come up. And it's not the first time we've seen like a Sri Lankan flare up and thought to ourselves, oh, they're going to get good, and then they drop off. Just hoping that this is the real deal this time and that Chamari doesn't retire to go and play franchise cricket or something else.
I think they are, decently positioned for a semi-final spot at the very least in the upcoming T20 World Cup. I see them as a top 4 side, I would say. I would say that they're a better team at this point than both of South Africa and New Zealand and Pakistan. Like they are the best side in Asia if you look at the title. But of course, India is still a solid team. Also, Ajit Kumar in the comments is saying, Behram, watch out for Rayan Parag's bowling. I think you will hear a lot about it in the coming days. Yeah, I don't know about that one.
I mean, he's not a bowler.
Yeah.
Look, I think it was Irfan Pathan put a tweet up about Rayan Parag's bowling and said, he's got his opportunity because he can bowl. Honestly, don't think that's true, because I don't think they think he can bowl, because he doesn't bowl, right? I think he is, the position they were trying to fill was slightly further down the order than Sanju Samson. They know what Sanju Samson can do. In a big tournament, if a big tournament was coming up now, Sanju Samson is still more likely to be in the squad than Rayan Parag. But this is a good chance to do that. And you give Shivam Dubé the ball against Afghanistan, and you try Rayan Parag in some games to bowl a few extra overs and everything else. That's absolutely fine. I find it hard to believe that Rayan Parag's going to be bowling for India in a World Cup unless everything has gone wrong.
Or even for Rajasthan in an IPL knockout game. I don't see it.
Yeah, did he? I've got a feeling
he didn't really. They had a lot of specialist bowlers, remember? So they didn't need him.
They had 5. Well, you say they didn't need him, which is kind of true, right? But basically what they had is 5 bowlers, and they desperately needed sometimes an extra bowler to come in and bowl for them. It's a little bit different with the impact sub and everything else. But he bowled, let's have a look here. He bowled 18 balls last year. He bowled no balls the year before, 24 balls the year before that. And 2019, he bowled 84 balls. That's the last time he bowled consistently in the IPL. Any part-timers, we've seen some random part-timers get wickets at times in international cricket and in any cricket. So, I've got no issue with him being able to do that. But I think he's going to start for his batting, and I'm much more interested in his batting than I am his weird bowling.
Yeah. Also, that's a major tangent. So thank you, but not really, Ajit Kumar. Coming back to the Asia Cup, we've obviously talked about how Sri Lanka have progressed so much as a side. And I feel great about them going into this T20 World Cup. I feel like they might be onto something special over here. And everyone must laud the strides that they've taken in the last couple of years. But Now, let's shift our focus towards India. They were favorites to win this tournament. In all the previous editions, they have been champions. If you look at this particular tournament, Smriti Mandhana was coming into it in otherworldly form. She scored 50s in both knockout games as well, so you can't fault her. Shefali Verma, her partner in the opening batting pair, she was the second highest run scorer in the tournament, scored 200, including 81 versus Nepal. And then if you look at the bowlers as well, right? In that semi-final versus Bangladesh, Renuka Singh took 3 wickets. Radha Yadav took a 3 for as well. They both gave no runs either. And they were such a complete side that what that does is it only goes on to make Sri Lanka's victory even more massive in my eyes, because India are, right up there in my opinion. And even in this tournament, they were pretty much on the button, and in the final they were undone. Sure, they also dropped a couple of catches, but you'd have to say that the way Sri Lanka won it, it didn't come across as an upset, did it?
I think the issue is what you just said at the end. It's the ease of which they won it, right? Like that was a tricky chase. What did you say before? The highest chase in a women's final. It was a tricky chase, and it wasn't. And Atapatu went out pretty, not early on, but she wasn't there in the death overs or anything, and yet Sri Lanka made it look pretty easy. Look, I don't want to write them off from the World Cup from this one game. I still want to see how England go when they get to Asia. I still want to see what Australia puts on, but I still think India's a really good show. But it's a kick in the teeth, I think, to them. Yeah. And it'd be really interesting to know if, and I'm trying to think who I would talk to within the team, but it'd be really interesting to know what they think of it and, where they come out of it. Because that's a bit embarrassing to get beaten so easily by Sri Lanka there, especially, if Sri Lanka was the second best team and was rolling through that tournament. But as we just said, Sri Lanka barely got past Pakistan in the previous game, right? So I'd be really interested to talk to them and see what they think of it.
Do you think the crowd element was important over here? Because Dambulla was packed. It was a full house and the atmosphere was electric. I saw some of the videos that Estelle had taken and posted on social media, which in my eyes is a huge win for women's cricket, right? Yeah. So many people turning up. But do you think that India might have gotten a bit unnerved by the crowd?
I wonder if the bigger issue here is... No, I don't think so, because they would have played away games at WPL venues, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's true. They would have.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're not used to probably not having home crowd support. But I'm sure they've played in places where that is the case on occasions. But maybe they've never played, in front of that kind of a crowd before. I mean, they made enough runs, so I don't think the pressure really had an issue from that point of view. And also, when does Sri Lanka get on top? Like, when Chamari goes out, India's back on top in that game, and that's 3/4 of the way through. I find it hard to believe that's the bit that kind of got to them, rather than just the other team playing better cricket.
Yeah, I mean, in the Pakistan game as well, Chamari got out and Sri Lanka needed, 21 of 20. So the game was more or less sealed. They made it interesting even after that. But she did her job, I'd say, in both of those knockout games. Also, some truth bombs by Hypercost whilst we were talking. He has told us how Sri Lanka are in the same group as Australia and India in the T20 World Cup. So that's not ideal. And also
the group of death.
Yeah, that Bangladesh won the 2018 edition. So India have not won every single one or Asia Cup in the past. Coming to Bangladesh, interesting, right? I feel like they've regressed as a side. Murshida Khatun was in really, really good batting form, scored back-to-back 50s, one of which was like an 80-something. And then Nigar Sultana also scored 50. But versus India in the semi-final, they really weren't ever in the competition. And they used to be a better team than this.
Yeah, but only briefly. Like, I wouldn't be too worried about it. And also, it's a bit like, we don't want to overreact to India losing to Sri Lanka. We shouldn't overreact to Bangladesh being in that position either. They're certainly going to enjoy the home conditions even more when the World Cup is played at home. I still think that they're a developing side and they're interesting, but I don't have them on that sort of West Indies, South Africa, New Zealand, Sri Lanka kind of period. They're more on that sort of Pakistan end at the moment. And so I don't think we should expect consistent results from them.
Yep, wrapping it up with Pakistan, of course, the other semi-finalists. They were decent. I was really impressed by Gul Feroza, back-to-back 50s for her. And then slow left armer Sadia Iqbal was phenomenal in the semi-final, 4 for 16 for her, but it all went in vain because Sri Lanka and
I remember we were chatting during that game. You thought that might be the difference. And in the end, it was the difference between Sri Lanka winning easy and not winning easy was probably
basically. I mean, Nashra went for a lot of runs, so I thought the duo would do well, right? Both are slow left-arm orthodox bowlers. Sadia had one of the best games of her life. I feel like she was unlucky to be on the losing end. But Nashra, she shat the bed. And what I felt really cost Pakistan was their fielding. There was a really an easy missed stumping in between over there, which cost them. And then I reckon there was a dropped catch or two. Even in the previous games, they were amazing at times where they would take phenomenal catches. I think it was the UAE game where they were taking worldies, but then they were like really bad when it came to ground fielding in that game, giving easy twos. And I feel like cricket has gotten so competitive in that lower rung bit beneath Australia, India, and England, that you really need to be on top of your game, and lapses like those will end up costing you. Pakistan have experienced some retirements recently as well, so they are a side in transition. And they are a talented side, but if they miss so many opportunities, they're going to be losing those very close games, which has been a bit of a theme with them.
Yeah, I kind of feel like they're talented and limited at the same time. There's a couple of bits of their game that I quite like, but there's a couple of bits where I'm like, I don't know. Like, once they lose 4 wickets, I kind of feel like they're going to add 20 more runs to the total. It's not an ideal situation to be in. But yeah, there's talent there. I remember watching Pakistan, a decade ago and going, this is not an international team and should not be playing. And they have, come on leaps and bounds since then. But yeah, they're behind that wing of teams that we talked about before. And that's and those teams are a long way behind the top 3.
Yeah. Have you noticed how similar Gul Feroza's face is to Babar Azam's? It's like they're twins. You should go check this out. You should go.
I always worry about lookalikes in general, and I'm not going to have a look at it. No, I think I'm going to skip this one.
Sure thing. Anyway, that wraps up our itinerary for overthrows, which means it's time for some super chats, Jared. So just shoot away. Let's see who we have today. Just 3. Starting with Anish. He's asked for our prediction for the Border Gavaskar Test Series or Border Gavaskar Trophy in Australia that will be played in the Australian summer. I'm going to go 3-2 Australia.
Yeah, that's what I went when I looked at the World Test Championship. Look, until we get a little bit closer and we know who's fit and who's not fit and who's in form and who's not in form, but I think India have a reasonable chance of winning that. I think they're likely to win again, but I didn't think they were probably likely to win some of the other times they've won as well. So they seem to get themselves up for that series in a way that Australia hasn't got themselves up for it. And I think that's a really, really important thing. Australia is going through a bit of a, rebuild of their top order. So it's probably a good time to go up against them and see how you go. From that point of view, with the makeshift opener and Usman Khawaja coming to the end of his career and everything, they might have to change a bowler or two as well, depending on how they feel about Mitchell Starc at the moment. So yeah, there's some question marks over Australia, but it's, India's already overperformed in Australia. Like, I kind of feel there should be some kind of regression, but I don't think they're out of it at any stage.
Yeah, I mean, they won with a half-fit side, right? Was it last time or the time before that? But 2 times in a row, they've won the Border Gavaskar Trophy in Australia. So they'll be feeling confident in this 3rd attempt. And I just feel like Australia, there's got to be a point where they retain this or win this trophy at home once again. And I'm going to take it one step further, Anish. 2-2 with Australia winning the final test match because I want a great series. Yashar Mall, he has asked, prediction for the West Indies versus South Africa test series, top scorer and top wicket taker. How many tests are being played in this one?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's 2.
It's 2? Then
I'm pretty sure it's 2.
I'm going to make this interesting. 1-1.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I did for the World Test Championship. I actually found that's one of the more interesting ones. Having a look at it just from the perspective of both of these teams are basically both really good bowling teams. And both of them struggle with the bat. I think we've seen, maybe Dazorzi and Bedingham come through, which might strengthen the South African batting a little bit more. If and who knows with South Africa who will get picked and who won't get picked. But, if that's their sort of 3-4, 4-5 type batting, I think that makes them a little bit stronger than the West Indies with the batting side. I think if Moti could be a huge part of this series. So I don't know what kind of wickets they're going to play on, which is the fascinating one. I know that Gray, where are the actual tests played, which would actually help me. I cannot find any.
Maybe Sabina Park, because there wasn't any cricket during the T20 World Cup over there, which was surprising. So I would assume one of them is at least in Sabina Park.
It's a very, very decent one. I'm just trying to find the schedule.
It's in the West Indies, right? That I'm quite sure of.
Yeah, it's in the West Indies. So it's the 7th is at Trinidad. And the 15th. So they're both spin wickets.
Ooh.
So
where's the second one?
Guyana.
Okay.
So I would go Bedingham as top scorer in the series and Moti as top wickets. I think that South Africa just have a little bit more in their batting. But if Moti goes on one, he could win that. He could certainly win a test for the West Indies there. Whether he can win 2, I don't know. But that they've got Sinclair, Kevin Hodge, Athanase as sort of part-time options,
Maybe Roston Chase gets a game.
Yeah, Roston Chase is another one. So they've got a few different sort of part-timey spinners to throw at that. Whereas I would assume South Africa will go with Maharaj only. And I think Maharaj is a very good bowler, but I think Moti is probably a more destructive bowler at his absolute best.
Yeah.
I think there's a huge chance there for that. I think if it was on other wickets, I think it would be a very different kind of situation, right? I think if it was on sort of, the fast bowling wickets, it would be very, very different. But yeah, it's there's certainly something there that is fun.
Are you going with 1-1 as well?
I'm trying to remember what I went with originally, actually.
I think when we did a footmarks on that particular piece of yours, you did mention how you wouldn't be surprised if West Indies win a test match over here. And we were both very, very, very not convinced by South Africa's away form.
Yes, exactly. I think a lot of people really overrate South Africa as a test team of recent times. I'll probably stick with 1-1. I think that I can't see West Indies winning 2-0, and I can't really see South Africa winning 2-0 as well.
I mean, I would be more inclined towards South Africa winning 2-0 just because, I don't know, they have had some sort of success in the recent times, but not away from home. So that's an interesting one. But Moti and Bedingham as top wicket taker and top run scorer sounds about right to me as well. So I'll go with the same. Sankalp Verma with the next question says, a brief about Cooper Connolly, please.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a shock that they went with him. I think this sort of shows that Australia's in non-World Cup mode. That they've gone with Cooper Connolly. I think he's played a first-class game, and I want to say he made runs in his first. I mean, it's only one, but I think he made runs in his debut first-class game, which probably is the feeling on him. Do you know what I mean? Like before that, he'd done a little bit in T20 cricket, but we certainly hadn't seen a lot of him. I think they believe that because he can bowl a little bit. I'm trying to remember. He's left-arm finger spinner. So there's a little bit of a feeling, maybe like that they can offer a little bit there as well. That there is something from that that they can find. I haven't heard masses about him, but I think they see him as a kind of like a batting version of Ashton Agar. Do you know what I mean? Like someone who can bat a little bit, who can bowl a little bit, and who's quite good in the field. Maybe the player they always thought Ashton Turner was going to be, and perhaps didn't quite end up as. But it's a projection pick, right? They're not.
Yeah.
I don't even know if he'll play all that much. But I think they think going forward that there's something there. He just hasn't played a lot of cricket yet at the moment. Another all-rounder from Western Australia, by the way. Really good that this one isn't another right-arm seamer because that would have been a little bit awkward. But you have a look at his record so far, for the Scorchers, and he's done okay. He hasn't really played much List A cricket. It's just a projection pick ahead of the next couple of World Cups to see if they can fit him in. We don't know much about him. He's only 20 and he hasn't played a lot of cricket yet.
All right, last super chat of overthrows. Anish once again asks, which team has a good chance of winning Champions Trophy 25 in Pakistan? I mean, the usuals, right? India,
No,
Australia,
India
England.
cannot win this tournament in Pakistan.
Why not?
Because
they won't be playing in Pakistan. True.
They would not play
So,
in Pakistan. So that one, I can answer that one 100%,
yeah.
Anish. Yeah, look,
if India win it, they'll win it in the UAE. But it's the big three, and then you've got South Africa, you know, in and around that conversation as well, I suppose.
South Africa probably should have won a tournament of the last 2 tournaments they've played in. You know, got to the semi-final and played a good game against Australia, who went on to win. And played, you know, got themselves in a position to win the last final. So I think they've got you know, the team to suggest that they should be successful again over there. They obviously have spinning options available to them, and lots of fast bowling. But the 3 main sides, we don't really know what England is going to be when we get to 2025. Australia, I mean, we just had the schedule of the Australian team. They just picked their one-day squad. So let me just have a look. So that's got their one-day squad has Fraser McGurk, Aaron Hardy, and I thought there was someone else in there. And they've got Matthew Short in the one-day squad as well. So they're looking a little bit ahead to the future. So we don't know exactly what their next generation is going to look like. India, we know a little bit more. Even, you know, we've had the retirements, but the core of that side is pretty solid and will be there. And then, as you said, South Africa's the other one. I can't see another team from outside of that group.
We haven't had any retirements in ODI cricket for India.
No, sorry, you're right. We haven't, have we? They're the one. But either way, even if we had, I think we know, you know, more or less the replacements that would be coming in for those players. But I can't think of another team that has a realistic chance at this stage in one-day cricket.
It's an interesting tournament because, you know, you only play 5 games to win it. 6. No, 5. I was correct. So 3 group games, semi-final, final. So it's one of those weird ones where it's not totally out of the question if there's a surprise winner, I feel.
Yeah, but okay, if that's the case, who's the surprise winner?
Someone who bats really well, because you can expect the surfaces to be belters in Pakistan.
So who's the team in ODI cricket that bats really well?
I mean, South Africa could go on a run, especially if the toss.
But we had those in our top 4, didn't we? I think that's fair.
Can see the West Indies do it in 50-over cricket. Currently, Pakistan is in absolute shambles. New Zealand is on the wane, I would say, also.
Yeah, and so you've got Sri Lanka, right? Who?
Oh, they're not in it. They didn't qualify.
Of course, they're not in it. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I was going to say
West Indies. West Indies haven't qualified either. What am I talking about? They weren't even in the ODI World Cup.
So Afghanistan's in it, yeah?
They're in it.
So Afghanistan's an interesting one because they have a par batting lineup. And what you're talking about, that, you know, on the Pakistan wickets, they have the sort of bowlers who, I mean, a lot of them have grown up in Pakistan, or at least were taught to play cricket in that sort of style. So I think there's something a little bit interesting from that perspective. But I'd be very shocked if the winner came outside the top 4, just because I don't think any of the other teams are good enough at batting. And perhaps Afghanistan, in making those 250 to 280 totals with their bowling lineups, can do some damage.
Let me make this more interesting for you. Okay, one group is India, Pakistan, New Zealand, Bangladesh. So you would have, say, one of Pakistan or New Zealand will progress alongside India. That looks the most likely of the options, right? And then on the other side, you've got South Africa, Australia, England, and Afghanistan. So Afghanistan, as interesting as they are, probably won't make it out of that group. It'll be, you know, 2 of those 3, Australia, South Africa, and England. And then come semis, that's what I'm saying. Anything can happen at that point.
Yes, but I still think that the most likely teams to make the semis are the better teams. But based on that, what you've told me there, India's probably the favorite because they have the easiest group.
But they also have a tough semi-final.
No, they do, but Australia, England, and South Africa are not guaranteed to qualify, whereas India would have to play, you know, with their ears to not qualify. You know, from that group, based on what we've seen of cricket of Pakistan, New Zealand, and Bangladesh. You know, Bangladesh played some good. I can't see how they can make enough runs to put pressure on. New Zealand are sort of on the downslope, and who knows what's going to happen with Pakistan. So India should make the semi-final, whereas we can't even confirm that South Africa, Australia, and England will make a semi-final.
Fair enough. Okay, that wraps up Overthrows for today. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners and everyone who showed up in the comments and sent us super chats. So thank you very much. Also, just a quick reminder to you guys can go to www.goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. That can prove to be a one-stop shop for all the work that we do as a team, whether it be written content, videos, or podcasts. We'll be back with another episode of Overthrows next week. That is all for now. Goodbye. And for those of you who are with us on YouTube on the live stream, stay tuned because we'll be back with episode 95 of the Uncovered podcast after this short ad.
If you have always wanted to turn your passion for sports into a career, well, I have the course for you. Fans with Laptops is the multimedia course that I came up with after millions of reads, views, and listens to all my work. It's designed for anyone to use their own fandom to get better at making content on the sport they love. Go to Fans with Laptops today. If me talking live about cricket is not enough, we also have an entire channel dedicated to the best stories in cricket called Good Areas. Find out what matchups really mean, understand the logic behind baseball, and look at the most important selection in the history of cricket of Basil D'Oliveira. Come and visit us a couple of times a week on the Good Areas channel for a new video.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 95 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber, who you can find absolutely everywhere. And we've got a few things that we need to talk about that have happened off the field this week, Jared. Let's start with Matthew Mott. The rumor mill says, and there's a very, very strong rumor, that he has more or less lost his job as England's limited overs coach. How do you feel about that? And even more importantly, they might be looking into Andrew Flintoff as head coach. So that's a really interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, so Lizzie Ammon wrote this for the Times, and I think since then Richard Gould has come out and said this is not the case.
Oh,
Yes, I don't know if you missed that one, but Richard
I
Gould
might
said
have.
that the rumors are not true. So it was certainly something I had heard as well. So you never quite know how these things pass around. But I certainly hadn't worried about fact checking it or anything because I hadn't written about it or talked about it. I was on a holiday. I didn't care.
I was in a flight, so don't blame me for missing it either.
I would have been surprised if they would have done that. I could see a situation where they went to Matthew Mott and said, look, we hired you for this, and now we see we're here. Is there a way of using you differently or phasing you out or whatever? The sacking thing is kind of goes against how they run their cricket at the moment. So I would have been very surprised with them making that decision, rather more the Jimmy Anderson conversation style with Matthew Mott might have been a little bit more interesting. Who knows what? I think it was Lizzie who had the exclusive. Who knows what she's heard on her side or how these things work. But yeah, it just that when I heard about it, it didn't ring true for me that they were going to sack him. It might have made more sense if he was going to be phased out and bring someone like Andrew Flintoff in. But yeah, everything felt a little bit off about that. I think Matthew Mott was brought in to be the person who just kept ticking the boxes to make sure that they kept being successful. And then suddenly they haven't been successful, and there has to be a rethinking of that. But I think if they really believe Matthew Mott was as good as he was, then he should be part of that process as well. And they should be trying to work out how to use him as best as possible. I'm sure, and I don't really think it's Matthew Mott's fault that they've stopped playing spin as well as they used to. And I don't think it's really Matthew Mott's fault that the generation that was really good is aging out, and the generation that wasn't as good is not taking over. Neither of those things are Matthew Mott's, problem. Doesn't mean he can't get fired because, they've lost 2 World Cups, but he did win one of them before then.
Yeah,
so.
that is true. He won the T20 World Cup in 2022 in Australia. And I mean, I'm surprised, or well, pleasantly surprised, I suppose, that rumor was false. But what had shocked me more was that how is Andrew Flintoff, or one of the top candidates? Because Freddie, sure, he's been with the English team for a bit, but he doesn't have that level of experience, in other cricket. And also, surely there are other better candidates for that job.
Yeah, he's been around a little bit. I don't know what kind of a coach he is and how he does things. The one thing I know about Flintoff is he kind of throws himself into things and really tries to do them to the best of his ability. it's possible that there's an element of that. He doesn't feel like the most England coach, but maybe neither did McCullum.
Yeah.
And they're looking for slightly different kinds of leaders from that point of view. But I don't know. We haven't heard a lot about him as an assistant coach, so I don't really know what the situation is. It doesn't feel like the most natural move to Freddie Flintoff. Also, I kind of feel like, don't they need to work out what went wrong and what is going wrong and how to do the reset before even worrying about the coach? You know how I feel about these things. I just think, so, we'll get a coach and that'll fix everything. It's like, not if there are structural issues or key issues that you need to fix here. Then you need to work out what kind of coach you want. With Flintoff, you would have two coaches who are very much like McCullum. And I always thought that part of I know McCullum suggested Matthew Mott, but I always thought part of the suggestion was Mott was to have one kind of more analytics driven cold thinker as a coach, and then one sort of hothead person in McCullum. With Flintoff, you kind of had those two kind of instinct led vibes dudes.
Yeah, that's true. Also, more news coming in from the ECB. Richard Gould confirmed that Zimbabwe, who will be touring England for a one-off test match in 2025, will become the first ever team to tour a nation, and the home board will be paying the cricketers a touring fee. And he has obviously said that they're doing this in a bid to improve the standards of test cricket and make it more competitive. But that all sounds to me like bullcrap. Although I am happy that the cricketers will be paid a fee.
So I remember years ago having this conversation with someone. I can't remember who it was, but someone who I think wrote a book about cricket and the way that it was run or something like this. And we had this conversation where I said, it's up to the home boards to obviously pay their cricketers, which it is. But he was saying, and quite rightly, when you play a test match away from home, you are allowing the home players to play against a different badge, a different player, different storylines, become heroes. You as an opposition player are part of their value. So the better way of doing it, and the way to sustain it into the future, is for cricket boards to actually say, okay, this actually works in two different ways. But when England play a test match in Zimbabwe, and then when Zimbabwe play a test match in England, so England don't make any money from playing in Zimbabwe, right? Yeah. And Zimbabwe don't make any money from playing in England. Whereas actually, if you pool the resources and everything together and go, okay, well, we're going to play you in two at home and two away over whatever period, we get half of the rights and you get half of the rights. Suddenly the England board has a reason to think that Zimbabwe is someone that they should be looking at to invest in. Now, obviously, in Zimbabwe's case, this doesn't really, we're not talking about the top end. The top end is India. And India actually, when India tour, they make the other cricket board rich. But they don't make any money from the fact that they're India. India could actually make more money, right? When they go to the West Indies, if they took 50% of that TV package, right? But also, West Indies would make a lot more money. In that way. Now, there might be a slight downturn at certain times where India like, well, wait a minute, at home we make, I don't know, let's say $10 million a test, and away we make $5 million a test. But it would actually mean that there would be an investment and a reason for these things to exist. This has been discussed in cricket for more than a decade, I promise you that. These conversations have got to the top levels. When it comes down to it, Australia, England, and India don't want that slight discount, even if in the future it might mean that they make more money from another market, or it allows for them to be involved in that. And so it means that when you have to beg the big teams to tour you, whereas actually you should be able to say to the big team, okay, we'll take 25% of the money when we tour to you, but we'll give you 50% when you tour here, because we still think we'll make more money overall, and we can then build a relationship and play. It seems like the ECB are fine. And I think someone wrote a paper on this around 2011, 2012, and it was given to the ICC, if I'm remembering my conversations correctly. They all know about this. They could have done this for years, and now they're doing it at this stage. I think there's just a better way of doing it so that it's not a gentleman's agreement and we will come back and play you, because we've seen situations where teams have not gone and played the opposition. And so that other board just gets completely screwed, right?
The follow-through has gone missing on many occasions. And I feel like what you're suggesting is far more plausible than just paying the Zimbabwean players a touring fee. Or I don't even know if it's
Exactly.
the players or if it's the board. I actually haven't read in too much.
That's a fair point.
So,
You're right. I saw the headline as well. I didn't quite get to
yeah.
that. The other thing is that it should support the board as well, because the board is actually part of it. And, you know, you won't get situations where you might have, I don't know, Australia's like, well, we need South Africa for 3 tests this year. And then they're like, oh, but when we come over, we're only going to play 2. Right? It's little things like that that will actually disappear a little bit more. It's a much better system. It's never going to, I'd be shocked if it ever comes in, only because cricket has moved on so far from when that originally came about. But that should have happened generations ago. And instead we have this weird touring system. And it's like, well, some of these countries can have sellouts. And, you know, in the old days, you could get more fans maybe in India or Pakistan to a game than you could in you know, to some of the games in Australia or New Zealand. But because Australia and New Zealand have a better economy, nothing to do with this, the quality of the cricket team, they might actually make more money from that. Well, again, that doesn't really make sense. And it's the whole thing of when you hear someone say, well, India make 70% of the revenue of the World Cup, right? As in, you know, that's where the money and the interest comes in, or 80% or whatever that number is. And it's like, yeah, they make 0% of the revenue of the World Cup if the other teams don't play.
Yeah.
Right. And we never think about it from that perspective, right? You know, you need the Green Bay Packers in the NFL, right? You need all these other sides in order to actually have the proper competitions. And yes, it would, in a perfect world, you would just have teams in New York and teams in Los Angeles in American sports. But American sports understands that that's not the best way of actually growing the league, even if they are obsessed with those teams more than anywhere else. And in cricket, we cannot get our heads around that. There was an article in The Athletic this week, I think it was by Matt Slater, and he was talking about, and you know, it was about the economic realities of what's going to happen with 100 and all these sorts of things. It's a really interesting article, but there's a couple of comments, and one of the comments, someone said, oh, the Athletic should have a cricket department. And Matt Slater goes, yeah, but you know, cricket isn't followed the same way that football is. And when I talk to people in cricket, they're always really obsessed with the idea that it's not followed the same way as football. And it's like, it doesn't have to be. It has to be followed the way that cricket is followed. And the Athletic could do cricket in a heartbeat. You and I both know that. You know, I've written a plan for the Athletic on how to do it. I've had discussions with other people who want to do the Athletic model themselves. Like, it would be easy for the Athletic to do it and make money very early on from that plan. Everyone always talks about what cricket is not, right? And the problem is we never talk about what cricket can be. And this idea of paying the opposition an ample fee rather than just doing their hotels and everything else is a part of going, well, cricket isn't like football, and cricket isn't like rugby, and cricket isn't like the NBA. And it's like, no, but there are other things that cricket can do that those sports cannot do, right?
That's true.
And we never focus on those. And I think this is another case of like, it's a step in the right direction, but probably 15 years too late.
That was one of your finest monologues ever on Uncovered. So hopefully someone from either the ICC or some big cricket board like Cricket Australia or the
We'll
BCCI.
probably get our account banned now from me saying all this out loud.
Or the ECB or someone from the Athletic has listened to it or will listen to it, and maybe something might come of it someday. But right now, the reality is far more grim, and 15 years too late sounds about right as well. We'll take a short break on that note. You guys are watching Uncovered with Jared and Behram, and we'll be back with more off-cricket drama after this ad.
Support us on Patreon and help us keep making our content. Join for exclusive perks like the AMAs, the live calls, and to chat with me directly on Discord. You can also enjoy ad-free content, early podcasts, and access to my emailer. Step up your cricket style game with Bodyline t-shirts. Explore their exclusive player-themed t-shirts, including favourites like Virat Kohli, Kane Williamson, and Ben Stokes. They also have team-inspired designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds. Their collection offers something unique for every fan.
Welcome back to Uncovered. You guys are with Jared and Behram. And another piece of news that's come out in this last week, Jared, is that Deandra Dottin is back in the fold. She has taken back her international retirement and will be available for the West Indies for the T20 World Cup, which is coming up in October. How much will that improve their chances? She was, of course, a very, very fine player back in the day, T20 World Cup winner. I feel like she was the first ever centurion in the format as well, if I'm not wrong.
No, I
I
don't. I
can't
mean,
remember.
is
Yeah.
Hypercost here? We might need him for that one.
Yes, definitely need Hypercost to confirm that. But still, a very, very major player for the West Indies over the years, and surely they will benefit from her unretirement.
Yes, I mean she's a fantastic player, right? I wouldn't be surprised if we see this sort of stuff happen more regularly, and the reason being, of course, is that it's a chance for her to put her name back out there at the right time. And I'm not being cynical or anything, because I would say in a perfect world she would love to play for the West Indies, but just from a normal point of view, she's a professional. She's off playing in all these leagues, but if she has a very big year or a very big tournament or a very big game, that might mean 100 contract or a bigger big bash contract, or a longer term WPL deal or whatever that may be. So these things matter. You look at her form, 2022 in T20 cricket. Am I looking at T20 internationals? No, I'm looking at T20 cricket. In 2023, she played 17 games and averaged 21, 22. So the last time that we kind of saw her, she had a bit of a down period. Obviously, we know that she's a much better player than that. And, we've seen other years where she's been fantastic and averaged over 30 as well. Might have something to do with that. Might just be that she wants to play more cricket. The thing about being a freelance player, and I don't think I've talked to any of the women who've done it yet, but I remember talking to the men who did it, and they were like, Jared, this is tough because you have one bad tournament, or you get a niggle and your name disappears for a while and everyone just assumes you can't do it anymore. And you don't have the safety net. This gives her a safety net.
It's the Chris Green predicament, isn't it?
It is the Chris Green predicament.
Anyway, Hypercost has given us some facts. She was, in fact, the first ever female centurion in T20 internationals. And she's also the only player to have ever scored at least one century and taken at least one 5-wicket haul in both ODI and T20 formats. But he has confirmed that she hasn't played a competitive game since September. So to your point, maybe she does want to put her name out there and wants a franchise gig or two by having a decent World Cup.
Yeah. And, also, I know this is going to sound weird, but in some ways, is the World Cup another franchise league for her? Do you know what I mean?
I suppose so. Yeah.
She will get paid. She will be looked after. She will, get masseuses and physio and diet and all those sorts of things. She will have access to all the training facilities and the coaches and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a different world that we're in. If being a freelance player had gone better for her and she'd had fewer injuries, maybe she doesn't come back. But I think we'll see in the men's and the women's game, a few players will probably retire at certain times. They'll go off and they make their money in franchises, and then there'll be a World Cup coming up, and they'll either want to come up because they just want to play for their country. They'll either want to come up because it'll work for them at that time, or they won't want to come up because they've been struggling on the franchise circuit. All these things are fine and normal.
Yeah, and they're all very, very connected in the world that we live in today, especially with so much money coming in women's franchise cricket. There are certain cases where they earn more over there than playing all year round, right? For their own teams, which is also true for men's cricket, if we're being fair. But with the women in particular, we've seen tons of retirements. And I think we'll see even more of these cases as well, where they'll make themselves available before a big tournament comes up.
Exactly. And I'm trying to think of a men's player, but you look at some of you look at some of these players who are maybe fringe IPL players or beneath, or fringe WPL players and beneath, and you think, well, how do they get from there back in? And a lot of times it is going to be playing in a World Cup and smashing India, right? Or smashing the England bowlers, or smashing the Australian bowlers, and or being the top scorer at a tournament, whatever it may be. Like, it still matters a lot. I don't follow football all that much, but I hear stories of footballers doing really well in major events and still getting signed up on the back of that, and the rest of their career they've never been any good. They played as a left back for Austria. They played brilliantly in the World Cup, and next thing you know, they have a better contract. And you see it in the basketball as well. The Olympics are happening at the moment. World championships as well. You see these players do really well in those tournaments, and suddenly, an NBA side signs them, or a major European side gives them a better contract. It's windows.
It's a contract booster. Even if you look at the ODI World Cup, Pat Cummins and Mitch Starc made bank in the IPL because of a successful 2 games, knockout games, right?
Exactly. And, these things really, really do matter. And to go back, without being cynical as well, she didn't grow up wanting to play for, the Southern, what do they call? What is the Southern team in the Braves? The Southern Braves
Southern
or whatever.
Braves.
Do you know what? I'm not saying she does play for the Southern Braves, but do you know what I mean? Like, I can't even remember the name of that team. She didn't grow up wanting to play for the Manchester Originals or the, you know, the Sydney Sixers or any of these sides. She grew up wanting to play for the West Indies. So there's still a part of her that wants to do that as well. And, you know, that makes sense on that level as well. But she's a professional now and she's looking after her career and her future. And at the moment, this probably works for her on a number of different levels.
Yeah, brings her back into the spotlight. And if she has a good World Cup, let's say she smashes Sophie Eccleston for 2 sixes, then that might just be exactly what she needs.
That seems unlikely.
Yeah, that does.
For anyone to hit a 6 off Sophie Eccleston.
These days, it's pretty much impossible. There is a piece coming out on Sophie soon, guys, so you can.
I think
keep
we
an
might
eye
save
out
that one for the World Cup. But yes, there is one coming. You're right.
Yeah. All right. Moving to India. Ajita Garkar has specified that they are looking at Shubman Gill as a future all-format captain. We've seen India's obsession with all-format captains in the past as well. It's something that they prefer. And right now they have Sky as T20I leader. We don't even know if he'll be leading India in the next T20 series that they play, because that might be a model that they have followed it in the past, so it might be something they might look to in the future as well. And plus, the 2026 T20 World Cup is far away. But in ODIs, we know Rohit is continuing for the time being, and Gambhir even wants Rohit and Kohli to stick around till the 2027 ODI World Cup if, you know, fitness is not an issue for them. And then in Test cricket, at least till the end of this cycle, we know that Rohit Sharma will be captaining. So they are looking at all format players. They've mentioned that in press conferences, both Gambhir and Ajita Garkar. How do you feel about Shubman Gill being that candidate for all format captaincy?
I mean, it's either him or Rishabh Pant make the most sense, don't they?
For me, I feel like they undervalue Rishabh Pant, especially when it comes to leadership.
Well, I wonder if a big part of that is just that Rishabh Pant they don't want to put any extra pressure on him with everything that's gone on in his life in the last couple of years. Also, you know, Rishabh Pant tactically is not always the most astute player. I'm not sure if either of them are brilliant tacticians at this stage in their careers, but, you know, sometimes things can change a little bit there.
Both young. Gill even younger than Rishabh Pant.
Yeah. It's very rare to see a player who captains early on who's not strategically interesting become strategically interesting later on. It usually goes the other way. They become more consistent. But anyway, so Shubman Gill is the other player that makes the most sense. He should play for India for the next 10 years minimum. He should play in the multi formats. I think I'm with you a little bit on the whole. We see him as an all format captain. I probably would have put it a different way. I would have said we see Shubman Gill as a future leader. Obviously, he has the chance of being a stalwart in all 3 teams. If he becomes a stalwart in all 3 teams, it's a possibility that he might captain all 3. But we're not looking at him as that at the moment. We're just looking at his leadership qualities and building on them and putting them in a position to get better.
Yeah, and now maybe there's a certain amount of pressure that you've added to Shubman Gill of performing in every single format because you're looking at him as an all-format captain, whereas I feel like all-format captains are a thing of the past, and really teams should look to maximize utility, and that does not mean that the same person leads in all 3 formats. So, at least to me, it doesn't.
I do think when it comes to captaincy, India is a little bit more old-fashioned than many other teams. The other thing they're obsessed with is announcing vice captains, which I still find amazing is a thing. So I do think they're a little bit more old-fashioned from that point of view. I don't think in the next 3 to 5 years that the idea of the all-format captain is going to be particularly that strong within cricket. I just think it's too hard, if for no other reason.
Yeah. Also, like, we don't know what the scenario will be with respect to form and how well, like, Sky is doing, for instance, as T20I captain in 3 or whatever duration of time, right? So it's quite a useless statement in my eyes, and Gill is young. They are, of course,
I don't think it's a useless statement. I think what they're trying to say is this is our next leader. And we are confident that this person is going to lead very, very soon in cricket. And we're saying that, but it's just like, but why do you need to make the all format part of it?
A better statement would have been that we have observed Shubman in the dressing room, and if we've gotten good feedback, and we look at him as a future leader.
Yeah.
Capiche? That's it. That you don't really need to say much more than that. But anyway, I mean, what do we know? Maybe he becomes one of the best or finest captains to have played the sport, because he clearly does have the talent with the bat, and he's got a really good dressing room environment as well, with some senior pros who he can learn a lot from. So yeah, let's see how that unfolds. Last news of the day, and this is something that happened like or came out like 2-3 weeks ago, but we initially forgot to cover it on Uncovered, and then you weren't here last week, so I wanted to save it for you. There is a proposal for a new stadium in Hobart, primarily for the AFL. So it's going to be an Aussie rules stadium, but it's got a roof, and they want to play Test cricket in it as well. A roofed stadium for Test cricket, something that fans have been yearning for so long. Hobart might not be the best market for it, but could it potentially be the start of a trend? I know we've had Docklands in the past, but especially with the weather in England, every year we hear about when will there be a roof on top of a cricket stadium, right? Hobart might actually make it happen.
I remember George Dobell, when we worked at Cricket Info together, looking into the maths of it, and it didn't make sense for any England cricket ground to do it. What is happening over the last couple of years is that the technology and the way to put a roof over a ground is changing very, very quickly. And because of that, there are now, and Hobart isn't the perfect example of this, because I think Hobart's putting a proper roof on, but there are now examples of ways of being able to do this a lot easier and a lot cheaper. And I know tennis is looking into it as well. Not quite as big an arena, but similar kind of, vibes from that perspective. I think that the technology and the way to cover grounds will change quite a bit. The problem with a covered ground is that, I don't know if you've ever watched cricket at the Docklands. It's not a particularly fun pitch. It's not a particularly good pitch. Now, Docklands was not built particularly well. It wasn't, it's not got a solid base or anything. I don't know as much about the Hobart wicket and everything else, but they've never nailed Docklands, and that would be my major concern to play Test cricket on it, that it would just be a crap pitch and no one would care. And so who cares if it's not raining if no one wants to watch it, right? But we are getting closer to this. The issue with cricket is that you never play enough games in one venue to justify the current price of roofs, right? So if you look at the Aussie rules, so Docklands is a perfect example in Melbourne. That has a ceiling, a roof, sorry, a ceiling.
Yeah.
And
same thing, no?
Yeah, probably. And it has them specifically because they're going to play about 40 or 50 Aussie rules games every year. They can pay that off. Who's going to play more than 3 test matches anyway? So Lords is one of the few places on earth that might play 3 test matches a year. That's still only 15 days of cricket, right? You add in another 5 limited overs games. Now you're in a situation where the other grounds are like, oh, we need, and you might end up with a situation where everyone gets a roof. Maybe they get crappier roofs. Maybe they overextend their club in a sort of Headingley kind of way or a Durham kind of way and find themselves in other sorts of issues. It doesn't fit as well with cricket. But what I have heard from talking to people of recent times about this is because the technology and the architecture and everything else is changing, and they're now finding different ways to do it, I would be surprised if in the next 5 to 10 years, we don't see even existing stadiums with some form of roof on them in order to be able to help in these sorts of situations.
I mean, if we wait a decade, Jared, we'll probably have a force field on top of existing stadiums, and the water will just slide off.
AI birds with laser beams. I might have actually written that in a book about Lords years ago. But Hobart's another good spot of, okay, you want to have a wicket, great. Hobart doesn't get a lot of test matches, partly because Bellerive is so small, right? But in the normal cricket world, Bellerive would get test matches, which wouldn't be a problem. But in Australia, it's like 1/10 the size of the MCG, or like maybe 1/8 the size of the MCG. And so there aren't many people who live in Hobart, and half of Tasmania don't even live in Hobart, right? That it causes a bit of an issue. But let's say we get a bigger stadium, which is what they're going to have for the footy. Let's say they can fill that stadium. Let's then give them some test matches and some limited overs games and see what happens. Maybe we can learn, maybe the Docklands can get better. Maybe there's a way that Docklands can get better wickets in there as well. Then you'll have 2 venues in the world that can play under roof. We can get more information on that and we can go forward. Right? And that's all we can ask for here.
Yeah, with the non-retractable roof, which I think will be the case with the Hobart Stadium if it ever gets built, because it is just a proposal for the time being. How much does that impact the playing conditions? Because, of course, cricket is one of those games which is heavily dependent on agriculture. And you said that the surface is mostly shit, but maybe they can have some way for the sunlight to come and seep through. Or, I mean, there's got to be a way around it.
Yeah, so the problem is if you don't have a proper roof, how do you actually grow the pitch correctly? I don't want to get too New York wicked about it. But we have seen a situation in New York of recent times where, you know, it's tough to grow a wicket anywhere. And a lot of things can go wrong. And the fact that I reckon I went to an ODI at the Docklands. I probably went to the first one. What was that, 2005 maybe? 2006? And we are...
No, definitely before that, Jared.
Docklands?
Has to have had ODI cricket before that. I remember Pakistan playing a game over there with Wasim in it, and he retired in 2003.
No, Docklands. You're talking about Bell Reeve.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Roof Stadium in Melbourne. I could be wrong on the years anyway.
I am talking about Docklands.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure early 2000s is what you're looking at. Maybe 01, 02.
Was it that early? Playing international cricket? I thought the first tour was... I mean, I could be wrong. I thought the first ever...
5 runs. I think if you hit the roof, that was the deal.
Let's have a look. So, how do we find cricket in here? So, cricket first played in...
I'm also searching.
I can't even find the first international game. It's so weird. It's probably on Cricinfo, isn't it? What is it called? What is this stupid ground called on Cricinfo? It's Cricinfo.
The Dome. Marvel Stadium.
Dockland Stadium, it's called. Yeah. So Colonial, yeah, it's changed names a few times. I still can't find. Here we go. Stats and records. So the first ever game was 2000. I was South Africa. Well, I was there. At least I got the team right. So we are now 24 years on from that.
Yep.
And they haven't played a lot of cricket there.
They played briefly during the Big Bash, right? The Renegades used to play over there.
Big Bash. Renegades play there, but internationally, right, it hasn't taken over. Now, that's a bit of a weird situation because the MCG happens to be in the same city, right? But they don't play a lot of international cricket at that ground in general. And part of the reason is that the MCG exists, and the other reason that it is because the pitch isn't particularly good. So we would have to be a situation where the existing ground isn't as good, which in Bell Reeve is perfect, right? And then the second thing would have to be that they have to come up with a good pitch. If you have a completely enclosed pitch at Bell Reeve, you're probably talking not about test matches. You're probably talking about limited overs games, and you're probably looking at hybrid wickets, right? Which we won't get into, but it's a combination between turf and they basically knit the wicket, which we've already seen in Major League Cricket has used them. They've been used in county games, in domestic cricket in England, second 11 games in England, those sorts of things. We have seen this. It is the future. And I think they've already, the ICC have already allowed them for international games. I don't know how many international games have been played on these surfaces yet. They might have in America. That, you can't really play test matches on those wickets. But they are fantastic for limited overs games, although the problem is at the moment that when the ball hits the grass, it reacts one way, and when it hits the artificial stuff, it reacts completely different way, and they're not sure how to fix that, which is an issue. It makes every wicket two-paced. Every player I know who's played on them has had a bit of an issue there. What I'm saying is, it still doesn't allow you to play a test match on it. So you're going to have a drop-in wicket on a ground under glass. We have no idea how that is going to play in Test cricket. But the fact that we haven't seen the Docklands really move towards that might mean that it might not be financially viable for the Docklands to spend all the money that they need to make sure that those wickets are great and then do that. Will that be different in Bell Reeve? I don't think so. Then you're going up against the existing cricket grounds that already exist. I think it's far more likely for us to have Test grounds that have some form of a retractable roof in the future. Whatever that may be, but pre-existing test grounds rather than building them from scratch for another sport would be my guess. Having said all that, let's hope it works.
Yeah. Oh, of course, there is the force fields thing that might come into play. And I'm not even joking. It might even come into play in 20 years or 10 years.
AI birds with laser eyes is the way to
who
go.
knows?
You stick your force fields.
Yeah. Anyway, let's take our super chats now because we're done with all the talking points in this episode of Uncovered. We've got 4 super chats, starting with Rishabh Sharma. He asks, have you ever wondered in test matches for a long time, the strike rate of majority of batters hovered between 40 to 55? Is it because of the scoring system? Why not 30 or even 65? And what do you think of 4-day tests? Well, I'll answer the last thing first. Nope. Big no for me. I like 5-day test cricket.
So I think the strike rate it's more about if you score at 30, you are putting yourself in a situation where great bowlers can bowl at you for too long. So if you allow Vernon Philander or, Jimmy Anderson or Rangana Haraf to bowl 15 consecutive deliveries at you, they're probably going to get you out. And so you have to be able to get off strike. And that's why great blockers from first-class cricket very rarely translate to test cricket. Because,
think Dom Sibley.
Yeah, there's heaps of them, really. And the reason is they can't get off strike. And so they just put more and more pressure on themselves until they're absolutely trapped. The opposite end, that 65 strike rate, the ability to score, it's funny. God, who was it I talked to recently? It was someone from my book. I think it might have been Jimmy Adams or Chris Rogers was saying, the higher you go in test cricket, or the higher you go in cricket, the more you know where the bowler's going to bowl. So in low-level club cricket, you don't sometimes I'll do stuff that I'm like, oh, I'm going to play with the crease here. I'm going to come out of the crease for one ball, and then I'm going to go back to the next one. Then I'm like, this guy doesn't even know what length he's bowling. How am I going to trick him? He doesn't know that the last ball he overpitched, right? As you get higher and you play higher-level cricket, you do start to do it until you get to the point where test bowlers basically bowl pretty accurately all the time. Trying to play on the up against that bowling and score at a strike rate of 65 is really hard. And it's why we've only had, I think, of people who've scored 2,000 runs in the top 6 with a strike rate of over 65, there's probably less than 30 in the history of cricket. It's because it's really, really hard. And you probably need to be like a Matt Hayden guy who's really tall, or a David Warner guy who has a weird technique, or, there needs to be something about your batting, Viv Richards or Kevin Peterson swinging the ball from the offside to the leg side. Those sorts of players.
Ben Duckett who doesn't leave anything.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be someone with some sort of extreme skill set, Virinder Sehwag through the offside, those sorts of things to be able to score at that level. Generally, those players are just going to go out a lot and they're going to end up with a slow average. 4-day test matches, I've got no problem with 4-day test matches if they're played over 100 overs a day. That's the issue at the moment, because I can't imagine cricketers signing on to play more than 90 overs a day when they can't even get through 90 overs a day.
Plus, if it rains one day in a 4-day test match, then good luck having a result over there.
Well, you say that, but 300 overs is probably longer than most test matches over the last couple of years. Look, rain is a big issue on 4-day test matches. It would help cricket's 4-day, 5-day problem, which is the fact that audiences don't watch TV as much on the 4th and the 5th days of test matches, and they don't turn up to grounds. Having an event day where the game is going to finish more often than not would also, there would be more declarations and more forced results and all sorts of things. But yeah, you have to be able to get more overs in a day, and at the moment we don't look like we're going to get through more overs in the day, so it's a tough one to actually have.
90 overs is a struggle at times, right?
Yeah,
Especially
exactly. So we have to fix that problem if we're going to fix the other problem.
Yeah. Anyway, Anish asks another question. He asks, what's your take on Nicole Bolton's comment on Mithali?
I don't know of this at all. Do you?
Nope. All I know is that Mithali has been commentating during the Asia Cup. And my take on that is that while she is not animated in the slightest, she does have a solid cricketing brain and she's very observant. So she'll pick up on things and will add valuable insight. But my God, is she dry when it comes to calling the game.
Okay, so I'm just Googling it now. And Catherine Fitzpatrick said to Nicole Bolton, do you want to be the Mithali Raj of Australia? So basically average 50 and strike at 50. Yeah, I think we all know that sort of happened with Mithali Raj. I mean, the problem with Mithali Raj is that she developed her game in the 90s when everything she did was absolutely fine. And she was still playing in, 2020, 2019? Mm-hmm. And so the game evolved beyond her. And it happened to Elise Perry, if we're being honest. And Elise Perry worked it out and came back. It's hard to do that because you are she was a legend already. And you're now saying, well, you're a legend, but unfortunately you no longer fit the modern game. And yeah, so I suppose it's not really Nicole Bolton's comment on Mitali, by the way. If I'm reading the right article, it's Catherine Fitzpatrick, who probably bowled to Mitali Raj in the 90s as well. Look, I've talked to a lot of players, women's players of recently, you know, for my book and everything. They all have Mitali Raj right at the top. They don't really worry about the last few years, her sort of getting a little bit slow, because they know how much better she was than everyone else. But it's certainly an issue. And we see this happen with great players sometimes.
Yeah. Deepak Raj asks, why can't I find your Cricket with Balls blogs? Why not, Jared?
I took it down. Maybe I looked at it a different way than everyone else, but when I felt like it was being neglected, and I never wanted it to sit there and be an archive. I wanted Cricket with Balls to be a living thing. It's not the only thing I've ever taken off the internet as well. I feel like that with quite a bit of stuff. It's not supposed to be like an archive that you dip in and dip out of. Cricket with Balls to me felt like a living experience of, of a website. And it didn't really make sense in the modern world. And I kept it going while I was still occasionally posting on it. And once I stopped posting on it, I was like, no, it's done. Now, from a financial point of view, it was probably silly to let it go. Because I could have sold it or, brought it back when I eventually left Cricket Info. But I don't think I ever wanted to go back to Cricket with Balls. I'd almost rather have started again with, the Almanac and goodareas.co now. And so those are very different things where I've kind of, I've got some posts on Medium. I'll probably never take the Medium post down. I'll probably never take goodareas.co down. But Cricket with Balls was just something else. And it was of its time, and I really loved it. But once I didn't have the time to put it up, I kind of disappeared.
All right, Path Right Winger with the next question. He says, saw Jared's take on Warnie's life. So how does Trump keep doing it? Is it like Narayan's batting where he knows a method to madness that we can't articulate? It can't be just God/luck, talent, and self-belief. Wait, which Trump are we talking about?
I think what he's talking about is that Warnie lived his life very fast. And so there was always a chance it was going to end at a certain point. Bad diets, bad sleeping habits, bad addiction to random pills and using that random pills and all these sorts of things. My nan smoked and drank her entire life up until her dying day. She was still drinking 6 cans of beer a day when she was in her 80s. And she smoked quite a lot. Some people just do that. There are people who have lived over 100 with horrendous diets. But, eventually these things do start to, affect you in different ways overall. But yeah, you're talking about two completely different people. Warren and Trump did not live their lives particularly similar. Probably the only thing you would say is that they probably had pretty similar diets, I would have thought, but they're different human beings living different lives. And also, to be fair to Warren, he was quite well off. I don't think he quite had Trump's money.
Yeah, absolutely not. Sankalp Verma asks, do you think fundamentals of cricket are set for failures? Breaks in between, more affected by weather, overall slow-paced. We are fans. That is why Indian market is gold. But I'm talking more about attracting new fans.
Well, I mean, I thought the 100 made a huge error when they just didn't bowl 10 overs from one end and 10 overs from the other end, rather than cutting out, the overs for the 100 to come up with a marketing gimmick. I think they alienated original fans and they didn't really add anything to it. I think if you're and I've talked about this before, I think if you're redesigning cricket, there's a bunch of things that you could do to make it more entertaining, to make it faster paced, to change it. Even in test cricket, I think you could do really, really interesting things. I don't necessarily, you might have a big lumbering fast bowler who whacks the ball into the wicket and you don't want him bowling on day 4. Wouldn't we be better off to substitute a spinner in and make it so that you now have to overcome a spinner? Maybe, you might have batters who are very good at batting in the first 2 or 3 days of a test match and rubbish on the 4th and 5th. Again, there are many things that we could do in cricket, but to be honest, Sankalp, we've already done quite a few of those. And it's funny, we keep talking about it when you talk about attracting new fans. Cricket has never had more fans than it has now. And it's never had more fans from more diverse countries than it's ever had. And it's never had more fans from a more diverse gender parity than it's ever had before. So it's weird that we keep hearing, oh, what can we do? I promise you, there are golf executives everywhere in the world still sitting around going, how do we find our version of T20 cricket? There are rugby executives going, yeah, rugby sevens is great, but it isn't making the money that T20 cricket's making, right? We are actually doing really well. But yeah, there are things that we are moving away from. I don't think the toss will exist in 10 years' time. Right? And I think that's one thing. And that isn't quite the sort of stuff that you're talking about, but it kind of is. Why does the toss still exist? Why not just let the home team do whatever wicket they want, but they can't pick when to use it, right? Little things like that I think will change in cricket coming up. And it's weird that you've asked this question on a day when I've just explained, well, Bayram's asked a question about roofs on grounds, and I've talked about the fact that we now have hybrid wickets for the first time ever. We're already innovating and trying to change the game. It will happen slow because that's quite often happens with cricket, and then occasionally you get a Lalit Modi, Kerry Packer type boost, and things change really quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting how throughout the history of cricket, we do see innovation and new things being introduced, but it doesn't always happen rapidly, to your point, right? So slowly and steadily, if you look at how the game has evolved, lots of things have changed. People are bowling, 8 ball overs at one point, right? So
4 ball overs, 5 ball overs,
4
6 ball overs, 8 ball overs we've had. We changed the size of the stumps. We changed the size of the balls. We put
they tried to get rid of the boundary rope at
They
one
tried
point,
to get rid of the boundary rope. There's video coming up on that.
You guys will find out about that soon enough. But anyway, that wraps up this episode of Uncovered. Thank you to all the people who came out and watched the show live, sent us comments and super chats. And just a quick reminder to everybody, you guys can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. It can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of this team, whether it be written content, videos, or podcasts. We'll be back next week with another episode of Uncovered. That is all for now. Goodbye.
Support us on Patreon and help us keep making our content. Join for exclusive perks like the AMAs, the live calls, and to chat with me directly on Discord. You can also enjoy ad-free content, early podcasts, and access to my emailer. Step up your cricket-style game with Bodyline t-shirts. Explore their exclusive player-themed t-shirts, including favourites like Virat Kohli, Kane Williamson, and Ben Stokes. They also have team-inspired designs and